Do you want to continue being the citizen of a nation state where your life is under the rulership of people who want to limit your freedoms and rights and control and extort your life? Or do you want to become a sovereign man or woman who is free and independent from all nation states, with your freedoms and rights intact, with the value of your life and estate secure and protected? Because you cannot be both at the same time. You cannot be a citizen and be a sovereign. It's one or the other. Greetings and welcome. My name is Russell Paul Arthur. I am a certified practitioner of sovereign law and the creator of Grace Sovereignty Academy. And in this video presentation, you will learn the practical and lawful differences between a citizen and a sovereign so that you can decide which one you want to be. And yes, you can achieve personal sovereignty if that is what you truly want for your life. We begin with examining and defining a citizen. What is a citizen? Well, the term citizen has many lawful and legal definitions, as well as historical context and meaning. So what follows is a thorough examination of the term citizen so that you can truly understand your status and standing within society as a citizen of the state. And we begin with some historical context. The term citizen has ancient roots stretching back over 2,500 years. We can go all the way back to the Greek Empire as the starting place of the citizen. In ancient Greece, especially in Athens, the city was known as a city-state, where the city itself was a state of governance and politics, a state that was governed by people known as the politis. Politis was a Greek term to describe someone from the city who participated in politics, held office, and casted votes. And of course, we have the word politician that has derived from the Greek word politist. Now, these people, known as the politis, were also part of what was known as the civitas. Civitas was a term used for the political community of a city. The civitas were part of the citadel. A citadel was a fortified area within a city where the governance and politics was centralized. The citadel was designed to provide a last line of defense and protection from invading forces. And so the civitas of the citadel is where we get the term citizen. Now, these Greek politis that were the first citizens of a city-state, they were involved in the governance and politics of the city. Those not involved in the governance and politics were not known as the politis, not citizens. They were just ordinary people without a title or role in the management of the city-state. And so, ironically, many years ago, the term citizen referred to someone who governed a city-state, in contrast with a citizen today who is governed by the state. Now, from its Greek origins, the term and role of a citizen became widely used by the Roman Empire. In the 2nd and 3rd century, the Roman Empire conquered the Greek Empire, and the Romans adopted and adapted the Greek template of governance and politics. In Rome, the Latin word for citizen was civis Romanus, meaning a Roman citizen. A civis was a man or woman who legally belonged to Rome and was recognized by Roman civil law as having a legal status and standing as a member of the Roman Empire. And this Roman citizenship came with specific legal rights and social rights. Those rights were the right to vote in Roman assemblies, the right to hold public office, the right to legal marriage with other citizens, the right to own property and make contracts, the right to appeal against certain punishments. And so a Roman citizen was a functioning member of Roman society. A Roman citizen operated under the rule and authority of Roman governance and law and was granted rights as privileges. Roman citizenship was a privileged legal status and reward for subservience and loyalty that was granted only to those who pledged allegiance to Rome, who earned and deserved protection from Rome. The Roman Empire was expanded throughout Europe, UK and parts of Africa through various invasions and conquests and the use of military force. This means when the Romans invaded Britain and conquered the British Isles, they did not arrive on the shores with a bouquet of flowers and politely ask if they could rule over the indigenous population. The Romans took aggressive military action to overpower and subjugate the inhabitants of the British Isles. They murdered, raped, plundered and pillaged their way through the British Isles by military force and conquest, where the indigenous people of Britain, mine and your ancestors, were forced to comply to the dictates of Roman law, governance and customs. Before the Romans expanded their empire, the men and women on earth lived freely on the land with natural freedoms and rights. But when the Roman Empire conquered a land and people, the people of the land were forced against their will to become subjects of Rome. In legal terms, a subject refers to an individual who is under the rulership and law of a sovereign authority. When the Romans invaded and conquered the British Isles, the people were treated as subjects of Rome. They were forced to obey and follow Roman laws, were forced to pay taxes, were forced to hand over resources, were forced to participate in the construction of the Roman template. However, a subject of Rome was not a Roman citizen. A subject of Rome had limited and restricted freedoms and rights. Roman citizenship was offered as a privileged status that could be earned, rewarded and granted to a subject of Rome when the subject obeyed the laws and customs imposed by the Roman Empire. Whatever the case may be, when the Romans invaded and conquered the British Isles, the original inhabitants, they became subjects of Rome. They were forced into servitude. They were enslaved to Roman rule. They were subordinate and subservient to the dictatorship of Rome, where they had no other choice but to comply or suffer the consequences of disobedience. The only two options a subject of Rome had available was to continue living in a diminished and impoverished life as a subject, or to become a Roman citizen and gain the benefits of citizenship to upgrade their quality of life, life that was downgraded by the military actions and laws of the Roman Empire. Now we can argue over the point that the Romans brought civilization and infrastructure, and yet their empirical achievements stem from the brutal practices of enslavement and servitude by force. They used military force to invade a country and dominate people against their free will, violating their natural freedoms and rights, deliberately causing harm and suffering, imposing subjugation and slavery. What I have described is the very definition of an evil act. Evil means to do harm. By definition of their actions, the political, governing and military force of the Roman Empire was an evil operation with malicious intent to harm the lives of people. And the Roman Empire never collapsed. Almost all nations worldwide have inherited the Roman template of architecture, infrastructure, governance, politics, laws and customs. The Roman Empire has evolved and morphed. The Roman Empire rebranded itself into a Holy Roman Empire that still overrules many nation states today, which is an extensive subject that we go into in our Sovereignty Academy. Suffice to say, just open your eyes, do your research, and you will find the template of the Roman Empire permeates throughout this world with established structures and systems designed to control and extort life. When we look to the UK, we can see the governance and politics has stemmed from Rome, where the citizens of the UK are governed by a civil law, a sophisticated version of Roman civil law. But the concept and application of citizenship still remains the same. Citizenship is a legal status and standing that one holds within a nation state. When people register their life to the state, they pledge allegiance to the state. They place their life under the authority and control of government. They voluntarily consent to be ruled over by state laws. In the United Kingdom, through birth registration, there is a contract and bond formed between the Crown, state and the living being who registers to become a citizen. A citizen is also defined in law as a legal person that exists and operates within the legal framework of the Crown and state. The word person can be traced back to its Latin roots. The word person has derived from the Latin term persona. Persona originally meant mask, specifically the mask worn by an actor in a play. Persona was also known as a character or role that was being played by someone. And that is exactly what you do as a citizen and legal person. You are a living man or woman who is acting and playing the role of a legal person known as a citizen, where the citizen is granted legal duties and rights, can own property, enter contracts, sue and be sued, and be held liable within the legal framework of a state. And so, in essence, a citizen is a legal person with a status and standing in society as defined on paper by legislated laws created and imposed by a nation state, where the citizen is a fiction of law. And this means the citizen is not a living man or woman with a soul and spirit, but it is the living man or woman that gives life to the citizen when the man or woman agrees to play the role of a citizen. The citizen is a name and title that defines a living man or woman who operates as a member of a nation state. A nation state is a term to define the total aggregate of all the people who are members of one community and nationality with a political body and governance. Therefore, citizenship is a mutual covenant between the individual and the collective who have formed together as one nation, as one body of people, where individual men or women place their lives into legal bondage and allegiance to the sovereign authority of the nation state, with the government that represents the collective body of the citizens. And in return for that collective allegiance, the state and government grants the citizen protection and privileges and benefits and rights in accordance with civil law. Civil law that comes from Roman civil law. Citizenship is a form of bondage where the value and rights of a man or woman are bonded to, subject to, and liable for the venue and jurisdiction of the state that rules over and controls the citizen. Where the man or woman has given consent to the nation state to impose and enforce the state laws onto his or her life. Right now, you hold the status and standing of a citizen as a member of the nation state, and where the value and rights of your life in a state has been incorporated into the state, where the value and rights of your life in a state are determined, defined, and decided by state laws, where through legal joinder and bondage you have a legal responsibility and liability to perform in accordance with state laws. You are legally required to be compliant and obedient to the dictates of a sovereign authority, or that sovereign authority has the legal right to utilize the law enforcement and courts to prosecute, penalize, and punish you. A legal right that you agreed to when you became a citizen, when you agreed to act as a legal person under the authority and control of the state. And so ultimately, the citizen is a legal person, is a character and fiction of law with status and standing within society that is defined by state legislations. The citizen is not a real, living and breathing man or woman. However, you as a living man or woman are registered as a citizen, and you have formed a mutual relationship with the Crown or state. You have agreed to play the role of a citizen. You have agreed to the diminished, restricted and limited status and standing of a citizen. You have abandoned your natural freedoms and rights when you placed your life under the authoritative control of the state, where you must now seek authorization, permission and license to live your life under the rule of the state, where your actual life as a living man or woman through legal joinder to state law is the bonded surety for all the charges, fees, penalties and taxes that are imposed on your life by the state, where your life is captured into a legal mechanism of control and extortion. And so, as long as you continue to identify and act as a citizen of the state, as long as you continue to register and contract as a citizen of the state, you will be treated by the state as a citizen who is under the authoritative control of the state, and where you will be held liable and responsible for all your actions as a citizen of the state. But there is another way. You do not have to be a citizen. You can obtain a far superior status and standing that protects the value and rights of your life, the status and standing of a sovereign. So what does sovereignty look like? Why would sovereignty elevate and benefit your life? The term sovereign has deep historical roots and is mostly associated with royalty and religion. From its earliest usage in medieval UK and Europe, sovereignty was reserved for kings, queens, popes, archbishops, and great nobles. The word sovereign originates from the Latin word superanus, meaning above, supreme, or superior. Sovereignty therefore meant the one who is above others as the supreme ruler and authority. Sovereignty was utilized by royal and religious leaders as a divine right to rule over others. Royalty and religion claimed a special relationship with God. God was conceived as the ultimate sovereign over all creation on earth. Royalty and religion claimed to be the delegates of God's sovereignty, with a divine right to rule over earth for and on behalf of God, where the leaders of royalty and religion self-proclaimed that they had the supreme authority granted by God to rule over the land, people, and resources of earth. And there are many historical documents, many royal and religious proclamations and doctrines where past kings and popes have claimed ultimate earthly power as the one sovereign monarch with absolute authority. A sovereign monarch has always been the lawmaker and lawgiver, has always determined and decided how the people under the monarch could live. And we see this within the UK, where the laws enacted by governments are called Crown legislations, because the British Crown and monarch authorises and approves the laws sanctioned by government. However, in any monarchy, the supreme ruler, the king, queen, or emperor, is not bound to the same laws. The monarch is above the law, accountable only to a god. And as a once powerful monarch, King James I of England once stated, "Kings are not only God's lieutenants upon earth and sit upon God's throne, but even by God himself are called gods." So back in the day, sovereignty was claimed by monarchs, by royal and religious leaders, who claimed that they had a divine right to rule, that they had supreme authority above all others as granted by God. Yet these claims have no substantial or verifiable proof, no basis in the actual facts of reality. There is no verifiable proof that a God exists, or that a God granted royal and religious monarchs the sovereign authority and powers to rule over others. And I personally think that claiming sovereign authority and power over the lives of other humans, the idea that one man or one woman could rule over millions of humans, I think that is a disgusting, delusional, vulgar, and insane proposition. What do you think? Do you think it's right for one person or one organisation to rule over millions of people? I think it is a complete desecration of human freedoms and rights. No decent human with a shred of self-respect and self-worth would ever entertain, accept, or tolerate another human claiming rulership and authority over their life. And I rather suspect that our ancestors also thought the same. Because back in the medieval times, royal and religious leaders with their self-proclaimed divine right to rule, they utilised military force to invade and conquer the lands, people and resources of Britain, Europe and beyond, murdering, raping, pillaging and subjugating innocent people as they asserted their sovereign rulership to colonise new territories in the name of God. And to rebel against these monarchs was to rebel against God's authority. As a result, of these royal and religious crusades across the world, the indigenous populations of Britain, Europe and beyond were forced to surrender, forced to abandon their natural freedoms and rights, and forced to pledge allegiance to royalty and religion in exchange for peace and protection. Peace and protection from the actual sovereign that was imposing its rulership, and peace and protection from the enemies of the sovereign. Everything that I have just stated would be no different than me declaring to you that I have just had a little chat with my God, and my God has told me that I have the right to rule over you and everybody else on this planet, where I put together an army, conquer the lands, people and resources of earth, forcing everyone under my rule and control. That is the lasting legacy of the royal and religious powers that still occupy positions of rulership in this world today. From the 17th century onwards, as evidenced in history, we start to see a shift and separation between sovereignty that was ordained by a god and sovereignty ordained by a state, where the governance and politics of a nation state took centre stage. Rather than a sovereign was law, it soon became law was sovereign, where the constitution of a nation state became the law that ruled the people of that nation state. And yet, in many countries, we still do have sovereign rulers who operate in the shadows as the ruling force of a nation state. There are still many nations in this world that are part of a crown commonwealth, such as the United Kingdom, where there is a constitutional monarchy that still reigns over the land, people and resources, where the officers and officials that operate in governance to administrate the crown commonwealth, they must take oaths of office and pledge allegiance to the crown, and they invoke God as their witness. For example, in the UK, a political party cannot form and a politician cannot perform in parliament or governance until they pledge oath and allegiance to serve the interests of the crown that has a vested interest in the value and rights of your life. Now, the democratic institutions of any nation state and its government would have you mistakenly believe that sovereignty resides in the will of the people as a collective, that you as an individual can participate in democracy by voting for a political party that represents your will. Doing so on the premise that your party will gain a majority mandate and take position as the ruling government. And while yes, you do have a say in the choice of government, you only get to choose government, you don't get to choose how you will be governed. And as mentioned before, in the UK, the government must pledge oath and allegiance to the constitutional monarchy that overrules the government, because the government is the administrative arm of the crown. And let's not forget, sovereignty can never be in the will of the people when the people must register to become citizens and place the value and rights of their life and estate under the rulership, authority and control of a crown and state. Sovereignty can never be in the will of the individual when the will of the individual is superseded by the will of a collective who function as a nation state, where the collective will of the people that is represented by the state and its government can ignore, override, diminish and suppress the will of the individual. And that is where we get the phrase, the mob rules. And so you cannot be a sovereign authority over the matters of your own life when the matters of your life are ruled over and decided by others. You cannot be a sovereign authority if you do not have the freedom and rights to express your individual will and live your life as you see fit. So the idea that sovereignty is in the will of the people is a delusional farce. It's lip service and not a practical reality. If you delegate your authority and powers and allow other people to call the shots over your life, to dictate your freedoms and rights, to enact laws and policies that go against your ideals or harms your life, then you do not have personal sovereignty. And even those in government who you delegate your authority and powers to, they no longer have sovereign autonomy, because all nation states in this world are part of a global network In these modern times, most nation states of this world no longer have absolute sovereignty because most nation states have entered into binding treaties and bilateral agreements with other nation states, where collective nations have formed international organizations such as the United Nations or the EU. These organizations are a collective body of nations that work together in lockstep formation to agree upon and decide over laws, regulations and policies that are applied to the socio-economics of their individual states. So what we have is these global bodies of nation-state representatives that form a General Assembly to decide over the matters of each individual nation state, which effectively is a global monopoly and a global government where sovereign powers form an alliance to rule over the people of this world. And you as a citizen of your nation state, you did not vote, elect or mandate these global institutions into power. And this is all happening without your informed consent. That brings us to the lawful definition of sovereignty. How is sovereignty defined in law? Now, there are several legal definitions of sovereignty that can be extracted from different law books. Here they are. A sovereign is a person or a political unit such as a nation or state that possesses ultimate authority. A person, body or state vested with independent and supreme authority. Supreme, absolute and uncontrollable power by which an independent state is governed. Supreme political authority, paramount control of the constitution from which all specific political powers are derived, the international independence of a state. Supreme authority within territory, legislative power, power to regulate internal affairs without external interference. The sovereign is the ultimate source of political and legal power in a given territory, no higher authority above them in that domain. And so all law books describe a sovereign as someone or something that has ultimate authority over everybody else, where the sovereign rules supreme. But we need to take a moment to realize that these law books are created and approved by the sovereign authorities, by the rulers and lawmakers who are affirming a national and political system of top-down rulership and control. And this brings me to the subject of a sovereign movement that is taking place in various countries across the world. There are ordinary citizens who have had enough of living in a system of top-down control that they believe is harming their lives. There is a sovereign citizen movement where citizens are claiming to be sovereign, where citizens are becoming activists as they oppose the state and government to defend and assert their freedoms and rights so they can live free and independent. But unfortunately, many of these people engage with conspiracy theories, not facts, where they strongly believe they are exempt and immune from specific laws and taxation. These sovereign citizens hold a strong belief that the Crown, state, government, law enforcement and courts have no jurisdiction over their lives, where they claim to operate with the authority of natural law and common law as a law that supersedes the legal system. And so these citizens, they protest against, ignore and violate state laws and tax codes. Many of these sovereign citizens have been found guilty of offences such as tax evasion, forgery, threatening public officials, bank fraud and traffic violations, because they are going against the system with no basis in law, with no credible status and standing, with no concrete or credible proof to substantiate their claims that they are sovereign. And I'm here to inform you that you do not want to fall for the schemes, false claims and empty promises being espoused from these people leading a sovereign movement as sovereign citizens. You also need to know that the established system of governments, law enforcement and courts have been designed to prevent and oppress any challenges or attacks, any acts of aggression and conflict that threatens the system. If you go up against the system as an angry, rebellious or violent citizen, the government will treat you as an extremist and domestic terrorist, and the hammer will come down hard upon you. Now, I completely understand why people would rally against the establishment, especially when they are disenfranchised with the state, they feel oppressed by the government, and they are facing financial or legal difficulties, and they blame the system. And while, yes, there is some truth and some justifiable cause for a citizen to be unhappy, unsettled, and distressed when confronted by a tyrannical and overreaching government, what these so-called sovereign citizens fail to realise is that they are legally committed to the nation state and its government. All registered citizens, through birth registration and various other bonds and contracts with the state, have voluntarily agreed and consented to be governed by the laws, regulations and tax codes of the state. Therefore, the people in this sovereign citizen movement hold a false and erroneous belief that they can hold citizenship as a registered member of the state who is responsible and liable for all the laws, regulations and tax codes, and at the same time claim to be a sovereign who is free and independent from the laws, regulations and tax codes. You simply cannot be a sovereign that asserts independent authority over your own life and be a citizen of the state where your life is registered, bonded and contracted to the authority of a sovereign power. It is one or the other. This means you cannot be a sovereign citizen. That's an oxymoron, because the lawful meaning, status and standing of a citizen and sovereign are in direct opposition to each other. And so it's one or the other. And I ask you, do you want to continue being a citizen, or do you want to establish sovereignty? Because if you have become disenfranchised with the state and government, if you are unhappy with how your life is being governed, if you have lost all trust and faith in the establishment, if you feel that your way of life is being limited or crushed, if you cannot continue with a loss of freedoms and rights, the rising taxes and the cost of living crisis, if you are looking for an alternative, if you are looking for a way out, then the only true remedy you have is to unwind from citizenship so that you can truly claim and assert sovereignty. And this can be done lawfully and peacefully. You can achieve sovereignty by implementing lawful procedures to lawfully and peacefully remove the value and rights of your life from being under the authority of a crown or state. You can become sovereign where your sovereign status and standing is recognized and upheld by law. And you can unwind from citizenship because citizenship is not mandatory. It is not a lawful or legal requirement. You are not obliged by law to become a British citizen. Citizenship is a voluntary process where you can also voluntarily exercise your free will to rescind and cancel citizenship. You can choose to exist and operate in your native land with a different status and standing. And that is exactly what we assist our students with at Grace Sovereignty Academy. Inside our academy, our students become sovereign members of our Grace Private Society. We have formed a private society as a sovereign body that is free and independent from all crowns and nation states in this world. Our private society operates within its own private and sovereign law form, venue and jurisdiction. And we have redefined what it means to be a sovereign. Within our private society, the term sovereign defines the lawful status and standing of a living man or woman who exists and operates with supreme authority and powers over his or her own life. As a living man or woman that exercises his or her natural and inherent freedoms and rights to self-determine, self-direct and self-govern the matters of his or her own life and estate in accordance with free will choice, where the lawful status and standing of the sovereign is recorded and recognised in law as a fact of law and is upheld by the highest laws of the land that protects personal sovereignty. Once a man or woman achieves the lawful status and standing of sovereignty, there is no other authority in this world that can override, diminish or subjugate the paramount authority of the sovereign without his or her expressed permission or consent. And that brings us to the practical reality of sovereignty. How you can exercise sovereign status and standing within a nation state of people who operate as citizens, and where there is a government, law enforcement, courts and public authorities who operate on presumption and assumption that everybody is a citizen under their authority and control. So that begs the questions: if you do become a sovereign, how do you safely navigate society with your sovereign freedoms and rights protected from the agents of the system? How can you still participate in society and access all the public services as though you were a citizen while maintaining your sovereign independence? How can you exercise your sovereignty and maintain honour and peace with the Crown, state and its government? How can you be sovereign without causing any conflict or provocation with public authorities? How can you be sovereign without being perceived as a threat or harm to public safety and order? And finally, how can you be sovereign and still contribute towards the evolution and betterment of your life and the world that you live in? And those are questions that we answer and provide the solutions for inside our Grace Sovereignty Academy. Therefore, if this presentation has provoked an interest in you to learn more about sovereignty, if you would like to learn how you can master the knowledge, skills and lawful procedures to achieve personal sovereignty in your life and improve the quality of your life, then I encourage you to check out our new Sovereignty Coaching Program and our Sovereignty Academy, as this could be a new pathway that leads you to your preferred destination. That leaves me to say, thanks for being here, wishing you and yours the very best.